I think there's been a shooting, you might want to get lots of blood ready. Her mum wrote to me and said, thank you for telling me she was unconscious. Scots are very poor at celebrating success. We're more afraid of success than we are of failure. Not very good with spiders. I think I'm afraid of my name's Michael Murray. I'm a consultant anaesthetist at the Institute for Neurosciences in Glasgow, and I specialise in neuro-anaesthesia and I look after the neurocritical care unit in addition. I think with anaesthetics you see quite a lot. The most stressful one, which still kind of haunts me to some degree, was I was working in Stirling. I hadn't long started anaesthetics, probably I'd done about 9 months. I was the on-call SHO, and I got a call from Accident Emergency to say there'd been a shooting in a school. And the first thing I did was phone almost by reflex, phone the haematology lab and said, I think there's been a shooting, you might want to get lots of blood ready. And I met one of my contemporaries who'd done a bit more anaesthetics than I had, and he said, what's happening? And I told him, and I said, looking for somebody to go in the ambulance. And I said, I'm not really sure what to do. And he said, look, tell you what, I'll go, because he'd done 2-3 years of anaesthetics. And it was I think the most thankful I've ever been in my life in retrospect. So I went down to A&E. I told the coordinating anaesthetist what was happening. I went down to A&E, and the first child came in probably about 20 minutes later, who'd been shot in the head. I hadn't seen that many gunshot injuries before, but it was pretty devastating. And we realised she wouldn't survive, and we kind of stopped what we were doing fairly quickly. And then the next ambulance arrived, and it was a grown-up, one of the few teachers that had been shot, and I thought I'm a bit more comfortable with grown-ups, so it was a gym teacher, and I basically took her and looked after her. And by the end of the day, it all settled down and kind of almost disappeared. By the end of the day, we cleared the place fairly quickly. We stopped most operating. We operated on all the people we could. I was on call the next night. There was still a few kids left in ITU. But it was probably the most stressful thing, I think, because particularly for me, being inexperienced, someone who survived, there was that fear that you might kill them by something you did, and so I got the consultant in to help me get her off to sleep and manage the rest of it by myself. But it was a bit of a surreal experience, and still to some extent haunts me. Not haunt, but it creates memories. And on the 25th anniversary, or the 20th anniversary, I was asked to do an interview for one of the Sunday newspapers, and I told a story about one of the children who'd come in who'd died, and her mum wrote to me and said, thank you for telling me she was unconscious, because I'd been told that she was crying out for me. Again, 20 years later, there was somebody who had ghosts put to rest for them, so it was so at that time I decided to kind of leave it, and I'll try and put it in the past as much as I could. Do I regret doing it? No. No, I know there'll come a day where I'll regret saying this, but most of the time my work doesn't feel like work. I go to work, I'm with friends, I'm with people I like, I do some things that are quite interesting. I come home at the end of the day and I think that didn't feel like work. We usually have a fairly light-hearted atmosphere. We have a good support mechanism at work where we're let out for breaks, we're fed, we're looked after, we're supported. Have a bit of a laugh, even though sometimes you're doing really potentially dangerous, potentially hazardous things. So no, I got here accidentally. I didn't intend to be a neuro-anaesthetist. It's just when I was approaching the end of my training, there was one of my colleagues said, "Oh look, there's 2 jobs and one person going for it," and I thought that might be the kind of odds that I would get a consultant post in. What I would have done, I suppose, growing up, I was keen on animals and natural history and watched David Attenborough programmes, and I always thought I wanted to be a vet. But then recently I was taking my cat to the vet and I saw an advert for a kind of annual monthly care package for cats, which included biannual anal gland squeezing. And to be honest, I thought, I'm probably all right. I probably don't regret that too much. I suppose childhood dreams would have either been either a singer or a comedian, but I fail in both fronts, and I'm not a very good singer and I'm not very funny. And I always remember Bob Monkhouse when he was being interviewed, when he said when I told him I wanted to be a comedian, they laughed. And he said, "They're not laughing now." Again, I'm not very philosophical, but recently I underwent a surgery myself. I had a cataract done, and I was aware that I said to the nurse, "Is your expression maybe cacking yourself?" And then I realised I was having something under local that was going to last 10 minutes, that I wasn't going to be asleep, that I couldn't not wake up from a sleep that I wasn't in. And made me realise how terrifying it must be for people to go off to sleep, knowing that might be the last moments on earth. And for a few patients it has been. I remember taking a patient who had metastatic breast cancer in her neck for a stabilisation, and I was just telling the usual dad jokes, and she said, could you please just get me to sleep? Which was reassurance that someone was either risking death or potentially fatal paralysis, rather than risking listening to my jokes. I think it's just it's such a frightening experience in many ways. What's bread and butter for us, it's potentially the last moments of someone's life, and that's terrifying. And I'm always very aware of that. And just to keep reassuring people and saying, "You're going to be okay. We're going to look after you. We'll be with you the whole time." I think for people to regain a sense of humour, I think there's a lot happens in the world because we don't tolerate each other. We're afraid to laugh at each other. We're afraid to enjoy things. We're afraid to admit who we are, admit our feelings, admit our weaknesses, admit we did things wrong. I think if we could relax a bit, enjoy things a bit more, then there'd be a lot more peace and harmony, and obviously world peace. But I think getting there would be a bit miserable if you couldn't have a laugh with it. Strangest. I do remember, unfortunately, I sometimes think I'm a 14-year-old boy trapped in a man's body, and we were doing a fibre optic intubation where we have to go through someone's nose with a camera, and often you check if one side is clearer than the other before you go down with the camera, and one of my colleagues placed a finger against one of his nostrils and said if he could just take a big sniff in, uh, instead of sniffing in, he kind of blew out through his nose, and this kind of thing that was about the size of an oyster landed on the door and started kind of flip-flopping down the door. And, and I just had to leave temporarily. So it was, I maintained my professional composure, and no harm came to any patients in the making of this story. And my biggest frustration is probably that we're slow to learn. Matthew Syed wrote a book called Black Box Thinking, where he said if a plane crashes, we instantly look at it, see what went wrong, and take action on it to correct it. One of my roles in the deanery at the moment is the promotion of civility, which is promoting basically very common sense ideas, that being nice to people, supporting people, introducing yourself, saying thank you, all reduce mortality. In the last 10 or 12 years, surgical mortality has decreased by 40% since we've introduced the surgical checklist or the surgical brief. I don't think we're doing things 40% better. I think we're just not working with strangers. And I think there's a continued lack of appreciation that the NHS is a human pyramid. Doctors tend to think that we're at the top, but we can't be top of the heap if there is no heap. And we're being held up by other people. And so if the porters don't go and get the patients, if the cleaner doesn't clean the operating theatre, if the secretaries don't write to the patients, doesn't matter how good an anaesthetist are or how good a surgeon someone else is, the operating room's not clean or there's no patient, we can't do anything. And I think there's a lack of understanding that we are interlinked, we have to be intersupportive. And I think once we start realising that and the benefit of that, and also the fact that lots of things have negative impacts on people, in particular anaesthetists. We have a very high abuse rate, self-abuse rate, and we have a very high suicide rate. And mainly because we, in medical terms, we own a gun shop. We sometimes life is out of control. And that concerns me. In a year, we lost 5 anaesthetists in Scotland out of roughly 1,100. And I think that's a tragedy, and I think that's probably the tip of the iceberg. And mental health leave has doubled in the last 5 years. So how we're treating each other is having huge impacts. Patients, we can't control a great deal. How we treat each other, I think we need to kind of move forward and keep moving it up onto the agenda. I think learn not to be afraid. I think lots of other people are better at bluffing it. I realise most of my medical career has been falling with style, as Buzz Lightyear would say. The important bits is that stress impairs performance. Being worried too much and being frightened is not either good for you or your patients. And probably just realising that you will not know everything, you'll not be as good as everything as you will be in years to come, but you have to start somewhere. And to not be afraid to ask for help. Chill out. Yeah, I think we need to take it down a notch. Not very good with spiders. I think I'm afraid of humiliation. I'm not the most confident of people. I I was thinking about it when I was 10. I won an international and national poetry competition. And now that would probably set you up as a child prodigy. Not in a council estate in Ayrshire in the 1970s. It puts a bit of a target on your back. And I think Scots are very poor at celebrating success. We're more afraid of success than we are of failure. And I think that's one of the things that holds us back as a nation. Probably less so now. But I think there was a fear of being good at anything. And now it's a fear of underachieving, a fear of running out of time to use the talents and to use the best abilities that you have. I think that's probably it. There's a bear walks into a bar and goes, "Can I have a pint of lager?" And the barman goes, "Why the big pause?" And he said, "I don't know, just probably born with them." He said, and the barman says, "That'll be £10. And he says, "We don't get many beers in here." And he said, "I'm not surprised at £10 a pint."